What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Sector for Nerds. Today we are here to talk about Daredevil Born Again episodes 1 and 2. Make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel. Some of you might be new here to my content because, yeah, it's not normally that I talk about Marvel content anymore. My channel, I mostly cover a lot of Star Wars content as I'm a massive Star Wars fan. But I tell you what, I am also a massive fan of the original Daredevil show from Netflix. I think it's the greatest superhero show ever made. So when I found out that they were going to be making a new Daredevil series and that they were tearing up a lot of their old scripts and they were going to make it connect with the original show, I was like, well, I have to check this out. And I got to come on here and talk about it. So hopefully you guys are excited for this, as this will be a 7 or 8 week journey, depending on how many episodes they release per week. Obviously, this week we had 2 to talk about. I think in a couple weeks' time for episodes 5 and 6, that's going to air on the same week. So that'll be another 2-episode thing. But make sure you guys are staying tuned, because each and every week when they release new episodes, I'm going to be here to talk about it. So I'll say this much, you guys. Something of key of note so far: I don't think that it's as good as the original show, but that still has time to change. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because the minute that the first episode started, I already felt like we were getting that magic back. The fact that you had Matt Murdock, Foggy Nelson, Karen Page all there, just standing around, walking around the city, talking with each other, laughing, having a good time. And I was like, wow, like we got the magic back here. They're sitting in Josie's bar, which is another place from the original show. It just, everything was there. Matt and Karen were talking with each other, and I was like, oh, are they going to finally tackle this a little bit more? Maybe, maybe not. I found it curious that Foggy was having a drink and kind of hitting on a girl that was not his wife. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something going on here. Now, obviously, that person would turn out to be McDuffie, who ends up working with Matt later on. But then all of a sudden, somebody shows up at the bar, and not only do they show up, Foggy gets shot. And I got so mad. There was a part of me that had a gut feeling that they were going to do that. There was a slight part of me that was like, okay, what are the chances that they kill off Foggy and Karen almost immediately? And I would hate that. Now, with Karen, part of me thinks they might as well have just killed her off, because we find out later that she ended up moving to San Francisco. So the odds of her still being in this series are slim to none. And if she does show up, it might be for very minimal scenes. I'm going to have a lot of other things to say that are more positive about the show, but to get the negatives out of the way, I do feel like we were all clickbaited hard. If you look at all of the promotional work that they did for this show, who did they have in all the interviews? They had Charlie Cox, they had Vincent D'Onofrio, and then Eldon Henson and Deborah Ann Wall. So the fact that you do that and then immediately take 2 of those 4 people out of the show immediately, that didn't sit right with me. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not willing to let the current story play out, right? Because there's still elements at play here that I'm interested in. Obviously, the stuff with Daredevil, the stuff with Fisk, right? Those are the 2 main characters, the main hero, the main villain. I'm obviously very willing to see where this goes, but I just remember being like immediately like, oh, why did this have to happen? And dealing with Foggy's death, man, like that was just such a freaking sad scene. And who's the one that did it? Well, it's none other than Special Agent Point Dexter, aka Bullseye. And it was cool to see him back. They're fighting on that rooftop, and Matt ends up throwing him off. And at first you think like, oh my gosh, he's dead or whatever. And we find out that he isn't. But it was just that idea that Matt was willing to step over the line like that because he had just lost his friend, right? Like what was it going to take for Matt Murdock to take that next step? And he kind of did in what he, the fact that he just lost his best friend. Now, I will say, you guys, like I talk about loving the beginning of this episode, seeing our main characters back. Another thing that made its return was the 1 camera shot mega action sequence where they just take 1 camera and they follow the action all the way through. I am a sucker for things like that. That one scene in season 3 where Daredevil's in the prison and they spend like 15 minutes on 1 camera shot. It was incredible. So to see that happen, and there were a lot of crazy moments in that Daredevil and Bullseye fight too. It's like Bullseye is like multitasking, and the fact that like he's fighting Daredevil while also taking out just other random innocent civilians. Like that pool ball shot or whatever that he threw at that one chick, like that was crazy. So very awesome sequence. Like the way that this episode started, man, I told you, like I got the feel. But then it was like once Foggy died and once we started moving on to like what the story felt like it was actually going to be about, I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be a little bit different. But again, I'm willing to let it play out for now. I appreciate that Foggy didn't tell Matt about what was going on because he didn't want to pressure Matt into putting on the suit again, which I think is key, right? Because both Foggy and Karen spent so long trying to get Matt out of the Daredevil life. And then later on, after Foggy's death, and they have that court scene, and Matt sees Karen again, like after a year, since after Foggy's death, that sounded like the two hadn't spoken with each other. So the fact that Karen is then the one that tries to push him back into being Daredevil for the sake of the city. Like, it was quite the turnaround. It was a turnaround that made sense. Now, there was a special agent that saw Matt without his mask, and that person would basically end up being hired by Matt to basically do all this undercover work for him, right? After about 15-20 minutes into the episode, we get our first Fisk scene, which was absolutely incredible. Not long after that, we see Vanessa back as well, which I'm glad that they brought back the original actress that played her in the show, because I remember originally they weren't going to do that. So it seemed like Vanessa kind of took over Fisk's business while he was away. You know, the thing about Fisk is, while he is this crazy giant man baby with a lot of issues, if there is one good quality about Fisk, it's that when he cares about someone, he really cares about someone, whether that be Vanessa, whether it even be Maya. And speaking of Maya, we actually get a reference of her. And I was wondering, like, okay, obviously they want to follow the original Daredevil show, which is awesome. However, that also being said, right, like this is the MCU now that they're a part of. So you're thinking like, okay, what are they going to do to like add some MCU flavor into this? Because we all kind of know it's coming, right? So I think the fact that they referenced Maya and her story, you know, the fact that, you know, Fisk said, hey, I tried to mentor someone once and that didn't work out. It is a big part of Fisk's story in the MCU. And I think bringing that up here was an essential thing when they're in that diner scene, you know, between Matt and Fisk, which was honestly probably like my favorite scene besides the opening scene. This was my favorite scene in both episodes so far. Every time that Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio on screen together, it is just absolute magic. And the reason we get to this point is because Daredevil hears that Fisk is running for mayor. And the whole Fisk can fix it thing, like, oh my gosh, it was so lame, but it was so funny. I love how the conversation between them started like almost kind of like two friends catching up, and there's a little bit of laughing and back and forth, right? Them trying to catch up with each other's lives, and then it kind of becomes serious, right? Like, I can't help but shake the feeling you're gaming the system. Like, if you step out of line even once, I'm going to come after you. And he's like, which side of that would that be? It does seem like Fisk, though, has kept to his end of the bargain when it comes to keeping Matt's secret, right? And he said that he had nothing to do with Foggy's death, which I do believe, because if it was Bullseye that was doing it, I don't think Bullseye would go back to work for Fisk after the history between the two of them. And on top of that, too, Bullseye tried to kill Fisk's wife, so I could not see the two of them working together again. And the big point that Fisk makes is, hey, when I become mayor, like vigilantes, that whole thing is going to stop. So if you decide to go back to your extracurricular activities, I would advise against it. Matt's just like, okay, you're right. I think we've established a lot here, and I think I know everything I need to know about you now, Fisk. From what I heard based on interviews between Charlie and Vincent, that it doesn't sound like Matt and Fisk are going to have too many scenes together. which I guess makes sense. It's not like the two of them were always on screen together in the original series either, right? Another big thing that we can probably note here as well, right, if we're going to the press stuff. I know I keep bouncing around all over the place, but it's just like I've got so many thoughts and so many things I want to talk about. But one of the other things that I think is being done right now while this season is being released is they're already filming a second season of this show. So meaning that they've got like a little bit of a long-term plan here, which makes me really curious. For those people that kind of know me best, know that, like, to be honest, I really don't care about the MCU as a whole right now. Really, this is the last thing that I really care about, and that's Daredevil. So anything that happens involving him, I'm going to be very much excited. Except for She-Hulk, because that was just garbage. So it appears that Matt is going to have a new love interest in this show by the name of Heather. She's a therapist. Matt had assumed that McDuffie had set her up as a client, which it wasn't. And then I guess that Heather thought the same thing. And really all it was McDuffie trying to get them on like a blind date together, which I guess it kind of worked because then they ended up seeing each other again. Then at the end of the first episode, they kissed. So it seemed like things were kind of progressing pretty nicely for the both of them there. I'm not going to lie, though. I thought she was going to die at the end of the first episode with the way that they ended that final scene with like Fisk talking and stuff being painted along the wall. I thought like, oh, wait, this building's going to like blow up or something and she's going to be in it. But that's not what happened. Another thing of note that happened at the end of the first episode was Vanessa wanting Fisk to make a promise that he won't kill him. And I assume him would be referring to Matt. But at the end of the day, Fisk won. Fisk is now the mayor, which is, again, I think we all kind of knew that that's where it was going just based on the trailers, based on the end of the Echo show, right? And then we get Fisk's speech at the start of the second episode. He references the Punisher and he references Spider-Man, which really makes me excited because I really hope at some point that we see a Spider-Man and Daredevil team up, and them going against Fisk as well would be incredible. I know Sony wants them. I know they do. So it'll be curious to see if like this show somehow sets up whatever is going to happen in the next Spider-Man movie. Because I think they've said too that like they want to go away from the multiverse stuff with Spider-Man and want to keep it more ground level. And what's more ground level than Daredevil and Fisk? Like, come on now. And it really does appear that the MCU really does value Fisk as a bad guy. The fact that they keep bringing him back. I kind of would wish that he would stop getting beaten though in all these shows, right? Like in Hawkeye, in Echo, which is, would really prefer that. Like to see the guy get some wins every now and again to, kind of make him a credible threat again. This whole episode is about the guy we would find out is the White Tiger who helps a guy that they thought was getting beat up. Apparently the guys that were beating up the one guy were two cops. He throws one of them on the train track and a train just comes right by and just... he was gone. So it seems like Vanessa is very much against her husband being mayor. You want to know why? I think it's because she knows that him being a mayor is not who he is. And I was sitting there through these two episodes like, okay, like I'm with Matt here. Like we know that this dude's game in the system. It's just a matter of when he's going to start playing his cards. And eventually he does to the police commissioner. Fisk ends up talking about, the cheesesteak. I knew the second that he brought up Philadelphia, I'm like, he's going to say something about cheesesteak. And of course, not 5 seconds later, he does. But as he like exposes the wrapper, right, of like where he got the sandwich from, there's a picture of the commissioner's wife and kid. Ah, there's the Fisk I know. The man that's got dirt on everybody. If y'all saw Daredevil season 3, you knew that by the end of that show, Fisk had almost everyone in his back pocket. And it's one of those things that really made you go like, okay, things have gotten so bad that it really feels like the only way out of this is if Fisk actually dies. And Matt proves in the end that that doesn't need to happen, right? He fights against taking that dark step, the one that he basically takes at the start of this episode, right? And that, oh my gosh, that final episode of Daredevil season 3 is so damn good. I could just spend like an hour talking about that. Another scene that I really found interesting about this episode, well, at first I'll admit I wasn't interested. It was just like this random, I would assume like a teenage girl or maybe a girl in her 20s, something like that, interviewing Fisk. I was like, okay, well, this ain't gonna be as good as like when Karen did it, because that was just like, that scene was crazy. But then when Fisk said that this girl was Ben Urich's niece, I was like, oh, I changed my mind. I am very interested in this. This girl, I don't think knows what this man did to her uncle. This episode really did set you up, though, like for the massive plot twist that happens at the end, because Heather, we find out that because she is a therapist, right? She's selling her book or whatever, right? Or she's promoting it. And then this boy asks for help. Because then at the end of the episode, when she says that she's taken on a new client, you think to yourself, oh, it's probably going to be the boy that asked her earlier. But it wasn't. It was Fisk and Vanessa. I love that, because now the question is going to be, is Matt going to figure that out? Is she going to tell him? What's going to happen? And obviously, it's not like Heather knows who Matt Murdock is. However, I also do find it interesting, right? Because Matt said in that first episode that he was keeping tabs on Fisk. I do wonder if Fisk was doing the exact same thing to Matt, and he knows that this Heather is important to him and is now going to use this whole marriage counsel thing as an opportunity to try and know Heather a little bit more to then get to Matt. Surely that's where this is going. And at the end of the second episode, we finally get Matt back in the action, taking out the two cops, that were there. I will say, man, some of these action sequences, they are gory. They are intense. So they definitely kept to their word on that. The showrunners did. That this was going to be one of those shows that in terms of it being like the original Daredevil series, and potentially in some ways even crazier. And I think it might even get crazier as we go on. Overall, you guys, it's definitely not where I thought they were going to take it in the first couple episodes. Because again, like, I guess I didn't expect Foggy to die so quickly. I didn't expect Karen to leave. So it's definitely kind of made me like reevaluate where the show is going to potentially be going. What I hope that this show can do in the end is to be able to add to the existing Netflix story that is there for Daredevil, and that it can have its own place in the MCU without worrying about all of these like massive connections to everything going on in the world. Now, that's not to say that they can't be there. Like obviously in this episode, we had references to Maya, and I think that definitely needed to happen. And if at some point, whether in this season or the second season, Maya shows up, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I wouldn't be mad about it either. Because again, she has been such an instrumental part to Fisk's story in the MCU right now. But at the same time, that being said, I wouldn't be mad if they just ignored all the She-Hulk stuff, because that show was terrible. But yeah, we're probably going to get like a court case or something for the White Tiger, right? Matt Murdock's going to have to try and defend him. I'm sure Fisk is probably going to send his own task forces out eventually, right, to go after all of these vigilantes. I'm sure there's going to be laws passed where it's like, oh, it's illegal to be a vigilante, so poor Punisher is probably going to be sat there like being hunted by people. It's so interesting, though, to me, the fact that they reference Spider-Man, because like the fact that they did that almost makes me think that, well, then surely if you're going to mention him, he has to show up at some point in this show, right? Because he as well would be then hunted by Fisk, right? If he is a vigilante, that would make sense. So it'll be very curious to see. I almost wonder if like Marvel and Sony are going to have to make some kind of a deal, or if they did make a deal where it's like, hey, we'll give you Daredevil and Fisk for your movie if you give us Spider-Man for this show or this movie. Because I feel like to make a reference like that to Spider-Man, like such an iconic hero, like one of the most beloved and known heroes of all time. I would say probably like him and Batman are the most famous heroes. So to put that in there makes me think that something has to happen at some point, even if not in this season, if they do it in the second season, or if they do it in some kind of movie. Like something has to happen with Spider-Man and Fisk. And Fisk is a Spider-Man villain, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think to see him and Daredevil team up together to take on Fisk would be such an amazing moment. I think for now, you guys, that is going to wrap us up for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion. If you're new to the channel, again, I would recommend you check out some of my other content here, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. But you know what? If for nothing else, if you guys are just here for the Daredevil videos, then make sure you guys are staying tuned every single week for my thoughts on that show. And then, once season 2 comes out, if that ends up going through as planned, then yeah, we'll talk about that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others to help support the channel, and I will see you guys next time.